La cosa abbastanza interessante e, se volete, un po' sfidante, è che parlare con Dan Graham significa un po' abbandonarsi, un po' lasciare cadere tutta una serie di percorsi logici che magari ci portano a fare una domanda e aspettarsi di ricevere un certo tipo di risposta, ma di considerare il suo modo di ragionare come un flusso non solo di informazioni ma di associazioni, alla fine delle quali idealmente si costruisce ogni volta una mappa di nomi, di luoghi, di situazioni, di progetti che sono tante volte l'inizio di un nuovo progetto, di una nuova avventura che Dan Graham sviluppa in più contesti. Ci tiene molto a lavorare sul tema, come abbiamo scritto così come inizio della conversazione, di musei e turismo. And I quickly switch to English because I think that you talked to me and Luca immediately about your necessity and desire to speak about how museums change and how museums are flexible platform for art or for people living around. So this could be a starting point, and the image we see here is a pavilion.
I use the word evolution because there are two artists whose polemical writings I disagree about. Daniel Buren thinks the museum is fixed because, unfortunately, he was educated in France into Cartesian logic, whereas I more was influenced by reading Walter Benjamin, some essays when I was very young, and also Andrew Fraser, who I think is a very dangerous misinterpretation of the idea of critiquing museums. It's called institutional critique. Also, I've worked with museums, both big summer shows, and actually addition to a museum to the Hayward Gallery. I've also worked in collaboration with a great landscape architect for the piece I did with him, Gunther Voigt, on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum as a summer show. But first of all, I want to congratulate Francesco Menini for doing a very great Dan Graham show, and also many years ago we were walking down the street near location of her new gallery, and she introduced me to Paola Nicolin, who at that time was one of the editors of Arbitrary magazine, and she asked me to do 2 columns. I really enjoyed doing them because I'd never written about architecture, and I still enjoy rereading them. They're collected in English, by the way, in my book Nuggets. One is called The 60s and Neo-60s. It's a bit of a critique of Rem Koolhaas. And the other was about the importance of the body and the interior in architecture.
But then, thinking about the interior architecture, here we are in Münster, in the Skulptur Project, and you often say that it was a very important pavilion you realize because about your interest in garden as first museum. Now you wrote a very important text at the end of the 80s about gardens as first museum. Can you remind us a little bit about it?
Well, actually, I became very interested in landscape gardens because I'd written an article with an ex-girlfriend about corporate Arcadias, the new gardens that were inside corporate buildings, and I was very fascinated. When I went to Europe, I found when I was in summer shows, like the show in Documenta in Kassel or the Skulptur show in Münster, that the site we were given were historical gardens, historical buildings surrounded by gardens. And also, I did a work for one of the regional art associations in France, Clisson, which is actually a small island, a land that was actually bought by a father of Poussin at a very good price after the French Revolution, and he made a theme park with Greek temples from Poussin paintings. And I put a work there, temporary work. And I realized that all these shows were about tourism. They were aimed actually at lower middle class families traveling by car, and sometimes even in France, parks, they would camp out. And I learned one thing in Europe, that Europe is about historical overlays. And one thing I share with my friend Asiya Bow Wow is I believe more in historical overlays than this idea that I never understood called modernism.
And speaking about French context, you often ironically say that you're not Monet but Seurat, which is probably the relationship between kind of pavilion for family, spending free time and stay with children, and those kind of references in your work.
Well, I never took Impressionism seriously. Then I realized many of the pavilions I did near corporate buildings, there were parks there where people took their lunch. Even in terms of corporate atriums, in New York there was the Ford Foundation, designed by Kevin Roach. In the center there was a garden designed by Dan Keeley, a great modernist, modern corporate landscape architect. And there would be benches in these small parks, people take their lunch, and sometimes grandparents would be there with their children. And more when I did these pavilions, people would lie down in the grass. So I didn't realize that my work was that close to Impressionism until Peter Fischli Weiss, said my work is not so dissimilar to La Guinguette by Georges Seurat. He also noted that the people lying on the grass, first of all, La Guinguette actually is all about people looking at a spectacle, looking at each other, which my work is very much about. But people lying on the grass, he said, you could tell they're working class just because their clothes and boots are stiff. So maybe he was, whereas I see Manet as very bougie. All the intellectuals seemed like Manet, but since I'm a big fan of Goya, I think maybe he was just intellectually derivative of many people. Maybe that's just an opinion. I think Seurat is a bit underrated.
Yeah, is it working? Yeah. One thing, going back to the garden, one thing that you might agree with Daniel Buren is that Daniel Buren said that the first museums were actually not the enlightened museums, but they were the Renaissance garden. Would you like to say something about going back to the example of Münster, for example, but not only?
Well, he's in France. Actually did a piece called Cinema Theater. There was a film that Rossellini made for French educational TV about called The Rise to Power of Louis XIV, where you people in the neighborhood of Versailles, just farmers and peasants, recreated the spectacle of Versailles, of Louis XIV in Versailles. But I think Buren seems to be fixated on the aristocratic aspect of the gardens. I'm more interested in France. France also had Hermanville, which was a French-English garden. And when I was thinking of the project that Jeff Wall was vaguely involved with, Children's Pavilion, I wanted to have the entrance rusticated like Hermanville, the interior a water basin, something like Lascaux, and the optics a little like Boulet. So I think France was actually an overlay of different periods of gardens, and I think it's just a sweeping statement to say that gardens were the beginning of museums. But I think it is true. The first museums probably displayed great works of art for people from the aristocracy. But the museum I grew up with was definitely more for the middle class or lower middle class who wanted their children to be educated, themselves to be educated about art. Myself, I knew nothing about art. So when I started getting free tickets to go to shows, I went to museums, and I learned an awful lot from museums.
So you're grateful to museums.
Not only that, when I did an exhibition 4 summers ago at the Zagreb Museum of Contemporary Art, I found they had an absolutely amazing collection of conceptual and performance art during the Tito period from Croatia and Slovenia. And I was educated into that period by the independent curator who did the show, and I made sure the show had some relationship, along with the curator, to what they had in their collection, as well as in the lobby I did my girls' makeup room, which is not only attractive for girls using makeup kits, but also apparently used by older women who often go to museums, who usually lipstick themselves. In other words, I'm interested in the general public that goes to museums.
Yeah, can I continue on that? Because this is a very interesting point. Because on one side, you just said you're interested in general public. You're not interested in highbrow or only intellectual seeing your work, but interested in families and in kids going there. On the other side, in some interview that we read, you are very critical also on the spectacularization of the museum of nowadays. How can you, let's say, and you never wanted to, enlarge the scale of your work to that extent. How do you see that position possible?
Well, first of all, I see the museums have been evolving. In the 60s, particularly with the socialist government interested in regionalism and using these small gardens, usually in Brittany, and also these very big shows like Documenta in Kassel or Münster. These cities needed tourism because they're very isolated cities. So they're basically tourist attractions. Also, I see most of these shows as being both against, in France, like the Parc de la competition was against the Senator Pompidou and against Disneyland. So there's always this balance between the two. A good example is in Documenta. Jan Hut's Documenta was like a circus, followed by Catherine Deville's show, which was like Encyclopedia Britannica. But my interest in large families, going to museums, is because I grew up reading anthropologist Margaret Mead, who had a big influence in America on me. So my point of view is really the family group is always important. And also in my own work, when I was first in school, I actually hated school. So I read Nausea by Sartre, and that led me to being in Nothingness, or parts of it, by Sartre. And I think I got very involved in the really idea of the child's gaze, and being gazed at and being gazed back. And that linked me also to when I was reading Walter Benjamin. You know, actually, in Belgium, in the Galleria arcades, actually galleries were situated there. So I like the idea of kind of passing tourists looking at art. And my point of view is really against this kind of French intellectual Foucault sociological critique and reductivism, which didn't make any sense to me. So in other words, I'm really a product of my early readings. Sometimes in terms of architecture, I picked up a little bit here and a little bit there. Aldo Rossi, I picked up a few things, but I never made any great study of anything. It's just, of course, science fiction was very important to me.
And addressing what Luca was saying, in terms of the material you choose for making the pavilion, you often say that you are interested not in showcasing your work, but in showcasing the viewers, the people who are living in your pavilion. Can you say something about the selection of reflecting materials in your pavilion?
It's just two-way mirror glass, which corporate buildings in the 80s started using in America. The ecology movement I remember it began with Jimmy Carter. He was a nuclear engineer originally. He was against nuclear power plants, and he installed solar panels in the White House, which were then reinstalled by Obama. When I visited Los Angeles, LA has a lot of sun, so the new high-rise buildings use two-way mirror glass, otherwise known as one-way mirror glass. It reflected the sun, which cut down air conditioning costs, but it created a surveillance situation. People inside could look outside and not be seen, and people could, in the modernist buildings, people could see how the corporation functioned, which is a bit of an alibi. But these buildings also reflected the sun, so they equate themselves ecologically with nature. So I like the idea of using two-way mirror glass, which fluctuated between reflectiveness and transparency, and also reflected the sky. I don't really understand the way Foucault uses the word heterotopia, but they were definitely pleasure situations. But it's a very good word, because it could mean anything. So I think the issue artists in the art world had was really that everything was being corporatized, certainly in America. So the way I dealt with it, I wrote an article about the corporate Arcadias. I think there's an evolution in terms of urbanism and art and how to deal with corporate situations. Similarly, we also have to deal with museums. And I had my own ideas and I had opportunities which I took advantage of.
But you seems sometimes that you add some pop to the modernism to a certain extent. With this idea of reflection, you often speak about the influence or your interest in Roy Lichtenstein, for example.
Well, I'll tell you, my biggest influence when I did the Dia piece was I had the first exhibition of Saul DeWitt. Saul told me his favorite work of art was a De Chirico that depicted Torino city plan. He also worked for I.M. Pei and also was chief layout designer for 17 magazine. So that he had a big influence on me. But even bigger influence was Saul DeWitt and Dan Flavin were guards at the very big Museum of Modern Art Russian Contractor show, and I got this idea, this notion that art could be somewhere between a hybrid, between art, design, architecture, and in my case, literature, because all the artists I knew when I came in the art area, including myself, we all wanted to be writers. It was the idea of the artist-writer. So I always saw myself in some kind of hybrid situation. But the idea of the city plan, Saul loved Louis Mumford, and of course I read Oppositions. And Aldo Rossi wrote about that, and that kind of stayed with me in a way. And my Dia piece has something to do with that.
Do you want to see the video of the Dia piece a little bit?
Yep.
Very sure.
Also, I have to say, when I wrote Homes for America, it was misinterpreted as a critique of suburbia. It deals with a suburban city plan. It's also a parody of all these sociological critiques in slick magazines of suburbia. This is part of the Dia piece.
Yeah.
The structure.
This went on the roof of the Dia in New York.
It was actually the entire roof was the piece, but the central part of it, the cylinder, I derived that from the water tower, which Aldo Rossi always said it connotes New York City symbolically. But also it's Baroque. Boys can see themselves inside as Superman. Overweight women on the other side can see themselves very thin. And make that in relationship to maybe a Renaissance a cube, which is also the grid of New York City.
Yeah, you said that this piece also has, as many other of your pieces, has a practical functions, right? You sometimes host shows there, or you can have videos in the A word that we will show. But can you say something about this hybrid nature?
First of all, that's not what I did there. What I did was, there was a wonderful essay by Walter Benjamin who said if you don't like the last decade, you construct a fake utopian decade. At that point, nobody liked the corporate 80s, so you had horrible neo-60s artists who misunderstood Joe Colombo and made their own fake 60s utopia. Actually, Jorge Pardo had a piece in Dia downstairs, and Walter Benjamin said, very important that you have a continuity between different decades to defeat historicism. So the tool shed at the old building, I made it into a combination 80s corporate atrium with a cafe, and also I have 1970s videos when artists were doing work in music, performance, and dance. And you could see on the roof, Battery Park City, the original Battery Park City was a landfill where artists did performances, dance, and music. That's part of the video catalog I did. I also used boardwalk material in that piece because Raymond Carlas talked about Coney Island. I know there was a plan by Venturi to make West Side Highway underground on top of Park. So I thought interesting to maybe link the Battery Park City to Chelsea, maybe partly unconscious. Also using boardwalk was practical because the dirt could go through the cracks. And it wasn't really my idea, somebody Dia's idea, ex-student of mine. I used rubber material that they use in playgrounds. So where children using slides would not get hurt if they fell down.
Sorry. Okay, so this is the video.
We have a short video of A Word in London, which is from 2003.
No, that's a totally different piece.
Yeah.
There's no relationship to Dia piece at all.
No, but you introduced the video, the fact that some of the pavilion have.
No, but the two have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
No, really, that's.
But you mentioned many times.
Now the idea of quasi-function, that was a totally different situation. This is in addition to a museum. I did 2 rooftop pieces, which were temporary pieces, using rooftops. The other thing about using a rooftop is you can have a view of the entire city. It's like an observation deck, like the Empire State Building. The other one I did was the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a collaboration with landscape architect Gunther Voigt.
We can see the images of the Met.
See, I think that one should actually go after the Dia.
This is the Metropolitan Roof Commission.
They do summer shows on the roof of the Met. I was very lucky to be invited to do it. The curator, Sheena Wagstaff, said the work should be about looking at the treetops of Central Park. I noticed on the fence there's kind of straggly little hedges that you could look through and see Central Park. Also the edge of the roof was rectilinear, so I decided to do a piece involving more formal hedges and also using astroturf because the ground looked like it used to be astroturf. Also, sophisticated people who read the better magazines and newspapers always dislike astroturf. So Gunther Voigt, landscape architect, who was my partner, came up with earthbound and the best quality of astroturf. And the center of it is a kind of a maze, two-way mirror glass. As you walk around it, you can see images of yourself gazing, other people gazing. Also the tall buildings, Central Park, and as the sky changes, the image changes optically. So in a way, this is almost like a fun house. I see most of my work is close to being a fun house situation. And that means both frightening and child-friendly at the same time. Or maybe the edge of being schizophrenic, which I might be myself. But I never took LSD.
But you talk about LSD in many of your works.
No, just some of my favorite science fiction writers did probably experiment with LSD in the 60s. I decided I would not do that. Marijuana, yes. Hashish, yes, but not LSD.
That's why you do distorted pavilions. That's already something to get to get dizzy or to lost consciousness.
Schizophrenia with humor to a certain extent. No, you say often that all your work is pointed by humor, which is very important for you.
I just remember that after World War II, where I grew up, many architects did playgrounds. Alva van Eyck, also Noguchi, the sculptor, did playgrounds. And my mother actually was educated, she was studied education psychology, and she got a very good job later on as head of Head Start, a program that the LBJ made to educate ghetto black children to the same level when they got into school as other students. I remember being suddenly afraid of playgrounds, maybe also being afraid of other children. But maybe it's. I think it's just very interesting to kind of watch families develop and how they see art as a group. So I often say, to get a piece realized, I say the work is a fun house for children and a photo opportunity for parents.
Well, continuing on this maybe personal note, in an interview once you said that you've never been a teenager, and that's your problem, you said ironically. Can you continue on that? You did actually one pavilion for teenager, which was never realized, no? The skate pavilion, we don't have a skateboard pavilion, we don't have here.
The skateboard pavilion is a little bit more interesting. No, I was not a normal teenager. I read books, science fiction books, and in my bedroom I listened to rock and roll DJs and read a lot of science fiction. I wanted to be a writer. No, I was not normal. But on the other hand, I kind of love teenage culture at a slight distance. The skateboard pavilion, in Germany, every 3 years, there's an exhibition called International Garden Year. There's a team of young landscape architects redesign the central park of the city. And there's an exhibition, and the exhibition is actually for suburban people who, where they could buy plants, new electric lawnmowers, and seeds. And they asked artists to make meeting points. I had an idea of a skateboard pavilion because at that time skateboarding was frowned on being in parks. I also made sure there was graffiti there. A friend of mine liked the magazine Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth liked Thrasher magazine. So I saw some of the designs in Thrasher magazine, suggested them. But actually, the pavilion also is it's a pyramid, two-way pyramid with the top cut off, because central cities then always had these kind of pyramidal shapes on the top. But if you're a skateboarder, this piece was not realized, by the way. If you're a skateboarder, you can go up in the air, have a kaleidoscopic experience. Almost like a 60s drug experience, inside a kind of a corporate, almost fascist corporate symbol of the 80s, bringing together the 60s and the 80s. And that was in my mind. I also did a piece called Two-Way Mirror Hedge Labyrinth, because I think the center of the city was a two-way mirror office building, and the edge was a hedge to define the property line of a suburban house. But also because this was done in Stuttgart. Thinking of Europe, there are hedge labyrinths. And also a favorite writer of mine, Michel Butor, wrote a book, Passing Time, about being lost in northern English city. and the city being like a labyrinth.
It would be Manchester, no? The city of the book, Passing Time, was supposed to be Manchester, no? Something like that. It's gloomy and very.
Well, he was a favorite writer of mine and saw the wit. I got to meet him actually before, because he seemed to be a fan of my work. Also, he was a Virgo, by the way. He also does science fiction, but unfortunately, the first these designs were turned down. But I did this 2-meter hedge labyrinth for a collector in San Diego, and another version of it now is at the Walker. But the idea of hedges, I really like hedges, is because from up close they're transparent. For a distance they're opaque. So there's a material I think that goes somehow between mirror glass in a way.
Maybe we can stick, if you don't mind, Paola, to this work, because you said how important was the view, no, and the landscape, and you mentioned many times that the landscape, and you love, for example, landscape artists or landscape painters, like in German landscape painter like Federico Oenge. So here is of course how there's a relation with the landscape.
Bring in Italy. When I was trying to research landscape architecture, I made a trip with my then girlfriend, who was German, starting from Genoa, down to Rome, looking at Manners Gardens. It was kind of an education, fun trip, a summertime trip. You know, Germans love to come to Italy in the summer. I guess we all know that, right? We all know that. And the area fascinated me because I could see that could be an opening for art I was doing, possibly.
But dealing with the landscape, or let's say I want to move to this project, which is, I think, still about landscape, but on another point of view. So here we are in Marseille. We are on the rooftop of this very famous building by Le Corbusier. Actually, you have an opinion on Le Corbusier architecture, I'm sure about it, if you want to share with us.
It actually has evolved in time. First, I had no understanding. I hated the Marseille block, which actually, when I had a show in Marseille, there's a hotel there, and I stayed inside as a hotel. All my architect friends told me how great he was, like he was, and then my wife Mieko and I went to the Carpenter Center, and she had a new realization that his interiors are female, and the exterior maybe is male. He was a Libra, so maybe he was balancing the two together, and I think his work evolved. First of all, when he was in India, he saw, as I did, Yantar Mantar, and the observatory that observatory is mirrored in Ranchan. Also, I think he became more involved in Mediterranean culture, and maybe he was a mama's boy, maybe his mother. All I know is that he's done some pretty bad work, but the smaller the work is, the better it is. Maybe in architecture, small is better.
And you often say that when you were invited by Oraito to do the pavilion, you found the terrace of the Cité Radieuse as a playground. No, that was more or less the first.
Well, the top of Marseille block actually is used as a playground. It's owned by a rather bad but trendy, he thinks he's a very trendy designer, Oraito, and he grew up in Marseille. So he bought the rooftop and did exhibitions there. Apparently, he's a fellow Aries as I am, and he always adored my work. And it was organized by director of Modern Guggenheim Gallery Paris that I do a show there. And he put up some money. In the end, he actually didn't pay for any money, but we did a great exhibition there. Which
Well, but we can see beautiful images of your pavilion on the top, on the terrace. And this was very important for you, no? Because it was a project about, again, the rooftop, the view, the landscape, the materials, and the idea of people watching by.
The material is one side is straight perforated metal. I started being very interested in perforated metal because I first encountered the use of material with Shinohara, the great Japanese architect, and then used again in a more playful way by Tsuko Hasegawa, who actually is one of my all-time favorite living architects. Never mentioned by Denise Scott Brown when she mentions there are no good women architects anywhere. The other side is a kind of series of curved S-curves and then maybe more tight curve. And as you walk around it, the two-way mirror, the perforated metal gives a kind of Mori patterness, and it also reflects the sky because there's the Mediterranean sky. And it's a piece that was unsold, but I was asked.
Se qualcuno è interessato.
I was asked to do something, a runway for Celine collection, and I kind of ripped myself off and did something very similar. I got a good fee for it, but neither of the pieces were sold, or do I expect them to be sold. But I like using this material very much, and in the Francesca Benini show, there's a new work, a model for a new work called Neo-Baroque Walkway. Baroque is so different from minimal art. On the other hand, Donna Judd wrote a great review about John Chamberlain's work as being Baroque. So more and more, Chamberlain has fascinated me because I wrote a very long article about his work because I think his work had a lot to do with shifts in culture. He also did the first important design work, the raw foam rubber couches.
Dealing with shifting culture and the show in Francesca Gallery, but also your interest in fashion, because the pavilion in Marseille was a kind of testing project for the one you did recently for Celine, no?
I think I'm doing almost the same work over and over again in different contexts.
Say that.
In other words, ripping myself off.
It's a repetition.
This is how
The classics do that.
No, this is how artists do it.
Also, but
In Dilemma, you just go back to actually my gallery, I used to never do variations. My dealer would always say, do a variation.
But the size of this is new. It's kind of very large, no, compared to other pavilions you did.
Also, the lighting is very different.
Yeah.
I couldn't control the lighting because I was in a hospital there. What I like is there are columns there. Many of my younger artist friends, they really prefer alternative spaces as sites for art because they have existing columns and elements. In other words, they're not architected spaces. So there were columns there, and I guess, well, it was interesting to me. This, to me, was a total wonderful accident that they did this, but I've always been very influenced by concepts coming from fashion.
Right. You always said you were interested in fashion magazine. Well, magazines were very important for your early work as well, of course.
Well, when I did the magazine pages, which were disposable, I thought of paper dresses. I didn't get that from fashion magazines, but from Time magazine. It was kind of in the air.
But also, I mean, your work. You said that your work always has a hybrid nature, right? And hybrid quality. And also, it's very interesting to see how your works deal with different contexts. In this sense, you are very big curiosity. It's interesting to think about what you wrote about the Dia Center, just to name another of your critique, how they make their artists in a they kind of killed their spirit, and you and also your Dia centerpiece is kind of dealing against that sort of musealization.
It was just one possibility. See, Dia was in trouble at that moment because Village Voice exposed the fact that they were buying beautiful buildings in Soho with their non-profit status. So, so it was a good investment for them. I was selected, I think, by a panel organized by Casper Koning and Richard Bellamy and Yvonne Rainer to do a piece at the new space. I chose the roof because I wanted to do something. I needed light, outdoor light, and also I liked the idea of possibly doing something that was both a slum roof and a penthouse roof at the same time. I never thought the work. Usually, when artists do work there, it's sold. I just wanted to change the idea, maybe only briefly. Also, they had lots of money available because they could tap into Andy Warhol Foundation, other foundations, and I was happy it lasted for 10 years. To be honest, also in a way, it was kind of against Heiner Friedrich. My problem with Dia is it's basically a mausoleum, Dia Beacon. See, Heiner is from Munich. But in the 19th century, there was literally a second. He believed that artists were gods, and art should be seen as a kind of Valhalla, spiritual situation, and they would also be like gods.
You don't like to fit in that
No,
Valhalla.
it's somewhat un-American in a way. But what he did, Heiner, he married a French Jewish millionaire. He was a millionaire, and they set up this kind of spiritual situation. I had a nightmare when I was doing Aspen magazine. I had to tolerate Lamont Young's idea of himself as a god. So this is not the kind of situation I enjoy. Artists being like gods.
You enjoy more this kind of situation, which is probably the opposite of the Valhalla, of the idea of isolation of the artist and the artwork. So this is an image of a very, very famous, still I think the largest shopping mall in the US. It's Canada, in Edmonton.
Well, before I go to that, I would say the best work I've done has been very instantaneous collaborations. I worked with Glenn Branca for a soundtrack for something to do with Vestkunst. There were Vestkunst exhibition. Usually I work better with people in other fields, but also I have to tell you, when I was every architect wants to be an artist. Like Richard Mayer did pretty awful work, and I started doing architecture models before, which I showed at Oxford Museum of Modern Art in '78, because I saw an exhibition at the Costelli Gallery of architects of models, and I thought, why can't artists also present partly as propaganda and partly as fantasy architecture models? So I think we're in a dangerous situation now, where every artist, beginning with Vito Conci and now with Tom Burr, thinks they're architects, or they could insert their work inside architecture. I'm very happy that I'm giving a situation which is very open. And I think the Dia roof, Met roof, were kind of open situations. And Met roof, I've really collaborated with someone I think was an absolute genius landscape architect. It was enormous enjoyment in doing the work. Now everybody wants superstar collaborations. In other words, Frank Gehry and Richard Serra. It's just big names. But you had a lot of fun at seeing the West End Shopping Mall?
Well,
Maybe you.
I mean, I'm getting more confident with isolation. Let's put it this way. But I think it is an interesting experience, at least. And you did a form of collaboration, not with artists, but with your student there. No, you shoot something.
No, it was actually it was my camera. I took the students up there because there's a conference called Informal Architecture in Banff. I took the student. Car trips are very important if you're a teacher. They're fun, and you can actually show certain things they might not know. I'd heard that it was the biggest shopping mall in the world, the West Edmonton Shopping Mall. So I just took the camera but I gave the camera occasionally to a student who was a much better camera person than I was. Did some editing. I never thought this was an artwork. What interested me was in Canada everything has to be indoors, and I was very aware of the great shopping mall in Montreal. And also, like you said, didn't have much fun as a teenager, but here was teenagers having fun. And I learned that the developer is Iranian Jewish, so there's a lot of water features, like Muslim architecture. I think Barakan took a lot of his ideas from water travels from being in Tunisia. But also Edmonton itself is a very multicultural city.
But Edmonton was also, I mean, historically speaking, a kind of model for the theme park, no? And you always try to relate the idea of educational and entertainment, museum and entertainment, and you say that you are not against, but almost sometimes a fan of a shopping mall.
Well, what I like about shopping malls is there are places there for older people to see younger people having fun, and they can sit down and be part of it. The funniest part of this video is there's little young girls, about 12 years old, with balloons around them, pushing around boys of the same age. I remember that's what it's like. Girls are much more aggressive than boys of the same age. The flamingo, you can see the flamingos here. This is pretty unbelievable. Let's just say it was a fun trip, and I never thought the video was that interesting, but I think it works maybe in a gallery context to show how maybe I like looking at aspects of modern architecture. Certainly I think Venturi was deeply involved with Morris Lopez. Certainly not Las Vegas. In other words, 1950s hotels and also retail stores with signs. So, so in a way, maybe this was just I being a tourist with a camera, enjoying it. What you're seeing here, this is a pet store. These boys in safari clothes seem to be wrestling with baby leopards, and I thought maybe this is what they do with their girlfriends in summer. They wrestle with their girlfriends, and you'll see there's a grandfather right there, just looking at this. So maybe this is an experience of a kind of not only commercial situation but a playground.
Yeah, it's sometimes a public space speaking about political power, no? Or the representation of power in even your pavilion, which sometimes are, testing the relationship between people and the balance between different forces around.
Well, I love being in conferences, particularly when they're in beautiful places like Canadian mountains. Although was great about this conference is I encountered the work of S.A. Bow Wow. But I think the food was terrible in Banff, if I remember.
Where was it there?
The mountains are much better than the food. Let's put it.
Bam. But I did learn something. We often have these conferences, you dine together with people who are in other conferences. I found out that advanced musicians like to go to Mexico. Like to go. The Mexican musicians like to go to Cuba because it has the highest. It has the highest level information about music now. So in other words, these conferences you meet other people.
Dan, I would like to come back to a very like a more general.
We're here. This is the top. Is that your turf? The top of the shopping mall, and it seems these Canadians don't get much sun.
It seems so, yeah.
Skin is very white.
Yeah, not much grass as well, actually, because in that particular situation. Now, I just like to ask you a general thing. You always say that irony is very important in your work, and we can understand your irony constantly in everything you say. I was wondering how much there is a parody element in your work in general, because you speak with a lot of love of your heroes, but I guess there is also a sense of.
Well, I don't believe in irony. I'm against irony. I believe in parody and humor. All the great artists deal with humor, being critiqued. No, I would say I'm more opinionated and angry than being critical.
It's a surprise. We didn't notice.
Even though I had very big arguments with Richard Serra when he first came to New York, he did a project with Venturi, Transportation Square, and he attacked Venturi because Venturi was using images of the American flag coming out probably from Jasper Johns, and Richard Serra thought this was fascist. I wrote an article, Architecture as Art as Architecture, defending Venturi, without mentioning Richard Serra. Richard Serra told me he always hated pop art. But in fact, sometimes it's just good to have good arguments. Richard Serra did tell me about how important Simone Porti was, and Naumann was to his work. And I invited Simone Porti to go to Nova Scotia College of Art to do a book. So there was a kind of interplay. But now the irony, if you talk irony, is that now all artists want to be architects, all architects want to be artists. So there's been a total reversal from that situation.
So we have actually image of at least one of the most famous pieces by Bob Venturi, who is his mother house. But while we are surfing in different, let's say, backgrounds of your talks, I first of all be more than happy to open the discussion to the public and to receive any question you would like to ask to Dan, or curiosity, or even
se qualcuno vuole provare a difendere una ventina di artisti, architetti che Dan ha menzionato.
I have to say, I took a German, very intelligent, wonderful German woman to see Venturi. Venturi's work in Philadelphia. Her point of view is Marxist and very European. She absolutely hated Venturi.
Yeah.
But
then why?
Maybe because he was Italian.
No.
You can maybe possibly somewhat understand where he comes from.
Well,
he was a lover of mannerism, by the way. His first book was about Italian art, and he also was a great colorist.
But while maybe somebody from the public can ask something, but I was wondering, a very banal question, but I always have the curiosity to ask you directly why your group of friends, of artists from the East Coast were so much interested in architecture. I mean, which was of course, you explained to us, that was the very beginning of our conversation, the idea of your environment, the New Jersey as a kind of a landscape where you grew up, and the importance of suburbia as a different settlement for living and for producing ideas. But which was the motivation looking?
The only person I learned anything from of these artists about something to do with architecture was Robert Smithson wrote an article about Olmsted Sparks, which may have been my first interest in landscape. Landscape and
Drawing sometimes, you say.
and also since in New York City there are many South Americans settled. So I had many South American friends, and I was fascinated by South American architecture. And I know from very early, I wrote the first article about Mata Clark, who was quite unknown. It was published in Parachute in Montreal, and I didn't realize his sources. First, Michael Gray's in Benstraff House, which is also the source of Frank Gehry's house, but also Leo Barbardi and South America in general. Maybe it's because, not in New Jersey, because in New York, there was such an immigration of people. And also, when I was invited to give a lecture at Cooper Union by an Israeli woman student, I found out a number of things about Elder Rossi. Maybe I shouldn't repeat them, but apparently, maybe architecture gossip fascinated me, as well as architecture tourism. Now, New York is still a great meeting point, and I did visit South America and saw some great architecture there. We have a question?
Do you have any?
Semi-question.
Yes.
So my question would be, when architecture starts and when the sculptures ends, is there a way to describe the limit between the two?
Well, I guess I don't consider myself a sculptor. Maybe I was never trained as an artist, so I don't exactly know what I'm doing. Although influence of Russian constructivism was very, very strong through Flavin and Lewitt, and also city plan. Also, do you know that Donald Judd wrote an article about the city plan of Kansas City, and then he moved as a teenager to New Jersey, which is highway culture. So maybe the writers about minimal art were more interesting than the work they actually did later. And since I was basically a writer, I picked up on those things.
Other question?
So basically, there's no real architecture, there's no really sculpture. It's still this kind of hybrid form somehow, no? You're interested.
Well, I think I'm more like an architect in one way. Whatever the client, if I get possibility of doing something, I try to work within that situation. And when I do things for people's houses, very important that first the work be able to be seen through a living room window, because the visitors can see it that way. Also, the area where children play, you shouldn't put the work there, or the barbecue area. And finally, the husband who actually puts up the money for the work for the wife, you have to make sure that he's satisfied about maintenance, flooding, things like that. I think most architects should do the same thing. Yeah. It's not function; it's just about how does the family use it. Yeah. I find fun because I learn about American families. As I'm Jewish, I'm finding first thing I say is I ask them if they still go to synagogue and if they go to Israel.
I think that we forgot to mention when we were discussing about the forms of pavilion that regarding the potential difference between sculpture and architecture, you often mention that you look at utopian architects like Boulez, Leduc, and so on. So all the generation of architects that were trained like an artist. No? There were no distinction. It was not the professionalization of the architect rather than the possibility to distinguish between two different fields. And sometimes looking at your pavilion, it's a kind of very disturbing situation, but very utopian to a certain extent, no? So well, referring to this kind of architectural models.
I've worked with two architects who fabricate my work, and I remember doing a tour with one architect through the Midwest, saying so he could look at, because the best architecture in America is in the Midwest. The S.C. Johnson building, Frank Lloyd Wright, was pretty interesting. When I saw it, it looked like a 19th century botanical garden upside down in the ceiling, and the columns were like water lilies. So it's combined 19th century and 20th century. And also the incorporations, I think Sarnin did the same thing for his corporate buildings. I think the corporation in the Midwest is like a family, which is not how we see it in the East Coast or the West Coast. And I think as an architecture tourist, I've picked up hints, but most of all from Japan. Particularly interesting in Japan for me is America sent General MacArthur sent Ruth Benedict, who was a student and possibly a lover of Margaret Mead, to change the culture. And there's an awful lot of communitarian socialism, which was in America then, built in to works of Itsuo Kwasugawa and other kind of architecture I like, which I relate myself to where I grew up in the 40s. So I think architects no longer, when they're young, they tour and see amazing things. I hope I got into art just to get tickets, so I could look at things. But also when I'm working with one of my architects, we work on things like the pavements, the flooring. I think flooring is very important because it's people's body and their gravity.
Any other question? Yes?
Is it on?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So with cultural evolution, obviously the idea of public and private is being blurred, but for example, the shopping center is still considered something very accessible, very public, where a museum is still considered a privileged space, not accessible to everyone. So I'm just wondering, how has your work, or how do you feel your work changes being presented in a public space versus a private space of a rooftop of a museum?
Well, this is actually a very good question, because there's one piece I didn't show. The Haywood Gallery had seen my Dia piece. It had a cafe, and they wanted a cafe. I had proposed, which actually Castel of Rivoli now owns, a children's daycare center with seated around computer and cartoons, because as a kind of daycare center in the lobby of the museum. So for the Haywood Gallery, I realized, along with architecture firm Haywood and Thompson in mezzanine, a situation where the general public, children, could sit down and watch cartoons, contemporary cartoons like Powerpuff Girls. I also had historical cartoons like Crazy Cat, Mickey Mouse for grandparents or older people, and also their touch screens. So you can touch the screen, and if you're a 10-year-old boy who's looking at cartoons, you can get Tracy email. They had British Council videos that were made for the British Council. You can press the screen, and you can get Tracy Emin's Why Did I Become a Dancer, which is rather sexually explicit. The area was also able to be used by the education department for children to make Liechtenstein, so there's a Liechtenstein show on there, or also for banquets. And I just think museums' functions are shifting, but the architects I work with did not want to destroy, they wanted to integrate the work into the Brutalist architecture, the Hayward Gallery, which people in London absolutely love. It's very slowly being dismantled, but I think the people really liked it. And I worked with, there was an enormous amount of people working with the firm. We also chose rotating Corbusier stools, because boys, when they got distracted, could just rotate it within chairs. I like the idea of working with architects on little details. The piece uses perforated metal, two-way mirror glass, some of it curved. But I really think education department in the late 80s is quite important for museums. There's a new museum in Saskatoon, and a piece that was about to be realized for the Vancouver Biennale, I suggested they could do it in this museum, get money from the education department. So it's my job, in a way, to figure out for galleries, in a way, to approach museums how to actually get funding for works. Because I have a really hard time getting work done these days. Saskatoon is where Joni Mitchell is from. So I would guess they might have a Joni Mitchell wing for her rather terrible paintings.
I think Massimo has a question.
Yes.
I think there are two families of pavilion of yours. You can divide in two, useful and unuseful. Café Hayward and Café Berlino, they deserve to something. They're built to introduce, to host, and also the skate pavilion, and also the one I saw at Marian Goodman for kids with a TV and cushions. So. And other pavilions who are most...
Oh, the Marian Goodman one was actually sold to Castello di Rivoli.
Sorry?
It was sold to Castello di Rivoli.
You see. Okay, this is another thing. And the other family is unuseful. And probably they come from Barcelona Mies. You forgot to tell something about this important pavilion, which is at the origin of many of yours.
Which one?
Useful and unuseful. Massimo does the distinction between useful and unuseful pavilions.
And he mentioned the Barcelona Pavilion.
And Miss Van der
Miss.
Pavilion.
Well, first of all, what I learned from Barcelona Pavilion is it was landscaped. It had hedges around it. And I think all the Mises' work comes from Schinkel. The last work he proposed before he left for America was actually a country club golf course. I think he's very clumsy in dealing with landscape issues, but they're always there. I think his Tottenham House is also, there's a conservatory on the side of the living room. I also think, this is just my own opinion, that Barcelona Pavilion was basically allegorical pavilion for new products of the Weimar Republic, which were actually luxury goods. A shop room showing luxury goods, basically Mies van Rohe's own chairs. And as you walked around it, it changed. But I think you can't underestimate tradition of landscape architecture in terms of being allegorical. I did visit myself. I also did visit Stowe. But that was short-lived. But the great thing about the Weimar Republic is it produced one of the greatest architects in Germany ever, Bernhard Taut. He learned his social housing is astonishing. use of color because he actually he lived in Turkey for a long time. At the end of his life, he was in Japan. So I really think cultural periods are very important in architecture and also my own writing. And my rock and roll puppet show, Don't Trust Anybody 30, which is on view in Francesca's exhibition. I wanted to cite that in 1970 when hippies moved to the country. It was the time of Neil Young's first album, but I also now know, I tell everybody in America who is so anti-Trump that Berlusconi was a better version of Trump, much more fun. And Trump, like Berlusconi, really is about gossip magazine dialogue. People read gossip magazines, vote for people who entertain them with gossip magazine situations. Although often Trump is, people on TV see Trump as a 73-year-old toddler.
I don't know if Luca wants
No,
to
I
add
was just
something,
thinking that.
but
No,
yeah.
I mean,
Sorry.
yeah, maybe I was just to link to Massimo's question about maybe the question is about how you deal with the context. I mean, your work was historically so important also because the few artists that started after minimalism to deal with different contexts, from the magazines to also the context of how much you are able or you are interested in dealing with to study the context and react to the context when you design a pavilion.
Well, not a pavilion. I think I have one idea, like magazine pages, I move on. I get bored with what I've done. Secondly, we have to bring up one thing. Architecture offices, I'm told, have a lot of Dan Graham books to generate ideas, and I have an awful lot of architecture books which I treasure, and I admit sometimes I see a semi-idea in the drawing which I don't really understand. I may make a photocopy and start thinking about new ideas as an inspiration. So I guess architects are inspired by artists, and artists are inspired by architects.
What we didn't touch, but it's probably kind of DNA or fil rouge between the useful and unuseful distinction about pavilion is also in terms of, again, spectatorship, and it's the role of cinema in your work, but in the pavilion
Theater.
in large. Now, the idea that pavilions are always like touched by this cinematic view,
Yes.
even if it's useful or unuseful.
Well, actually, I did a great work of art model called Cinema, which very similar to Hanselblatt Cinema of Duiker, which actually I hadn't seen. With that, Centre Pompidou built, and destroyed, and now they showed it in destroyed situation. Also in architecture, theory, and writing, that idea of how important cinema was for architecture is often discussed. I know that Sol loved Antonioni, whereas I always preferred Elio Petri because of the humor.
So I think that we can conclude with some Ursula Andress, as Luca used to say.
La decima vittima. The movie is referring to is La decima vittima by Elio Petri, which is a science fiction from
very
65.
schizophrenic references, but it is. You often speak about this movie with a kind of revelation about, again, cinema, science fiction, Italian movie directors, and all this kind of environment that influence you a lot.
But then I have a gossip scoop. The next Tarantino film, starring Brad Pitt, about Sharon Tate murders, is going to be called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I've never met Brad Pitt, but he came up to me at an art fair many years ago, bowed down and said he was a big admirer of my work. He bought Neo Rash for $1.5 million. I found out that he really wants to be an architect, and he's now dating Israeli woman architect designer. Her work looks like very bad Ron Howard. But I think he's a great comedic talent. I sure would like to meet him. Just so we could share ideas about architecture.
That's a good collaboration, I think.
The next one is Dan Graham and
So if there is no other question, I really thank you.
Also, if you're architects,
No?
at Yashi, Metier Bow Wow, I showed him Luigi Nervi books. He was absolutely fascinated to learn. So I think the best building in New York City is the bus station, and Nervi is done. Anyway, thank you for coming.
Thank you
Thanks
to
to
you,
you.
Dan. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.